Welcome everyone to Pontos Fathom Press. This is our episode 53 of Pontos Fathom Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about Heraclitus and Evangelion 2.0. Concept today is stepping into the river twice, Rebuild of Evangelion, and Astrological Uranus. I think we want to talk kind of about how, especially in Evangelion 2.0, you get this idea of, let's just call it in world building, that you really can't replay the scenario again, right? So the idea of Heraclitus's famous "you cannot step into the same river twice" really comes off the board, especially with a character like Mari getting introduced in this one. But I also want to go into some of Heraclitus's other aphorisms. The way up is the way down. The barking dog one. There's a number of Heraclitus ones we can explore through this. But I also want to link those into a lot of what Heraclitus's concept of flux is about, the idea of change, and I think astrological Uranus is the planet that rules change and rules revolutions. So we'll kind of bring all that together and we'll sort of focus it around Evangelion 2.0. Before we jump into the podcast, quick shout out to this channel sponsor, Pontos Fathom Press. We've got the mammoth Cat 2 Journals Out of Lovecraft's Providence hardcover edition. You guys can go check that out in the bookstore below. Helps to support the channel. You can check us out on our Patreon too. And thanks to our Patreon subscribers and the subscribers here. Liking, subscribing, and commenting here also helps get recognized by Nerve's Cele that helps to beat the algorithm. So thanks a lot. I mean, jumping right off the bat, I think what's interesting about Evangelion 2.0 is we start right out with the new character, right? The off-screen comes on, it's Mari. We've not seen her before. And I think this jumps right into some of the controversies that came out when 2.0 first came out. But it really jumps into a number of these Heraclitus aphorisms. You can't step into the same river twice. All this flux. So I think you see this right off the bat. The Eva looks strange. The world is totally different. We get this new character in addition to the original three children from Neon Genesis Evangelion, Shinji, Rei, and Asuka. Now we have Mari as well, and she kind of comes in with a refreshing sort of view on it. If you think about, so Heraclitus has that saying you can't step into the same river twice. So you kind of figure this, let's think of it from the point of view of Hideki Anno's Rebuild of Evangelion. The idea he's sort of, actually his perspective changed since he maybe produced the original Neon Genesis Evangelion. And this sort of change in direction, I kind of want to think about this as Heraclitus' idea that everything's in flux, and that even though it's the same creator approaching the same material, things are different. And I think the new character and all the deviations that kind of were controversial, and also this is the starting point, just the introduction of Mari into the story. How will she merge with the other characters? We get this solo scene as the anime opens up, and we see that she's kind of got some of those, a kind of a more playful version, where Asuka is more angry, Mari's a bit more playful, she's more carefree. It's almost like she loves the gamification of it, as opposed to Asuka, maybe she has an axe to grind. So I think the difference here is doing what you love. Mari kind of represents doing what you love, and I think maybe this is this new character and this deviation, maybe something that came up from Anno. But I think this is kind of a tangible symbol of change and transformation that we talk about. And I guess the idea here is that no story, no creator, no creation remains static, right? So this impermanence that gets introduced, it's even got that funny line at the end where, she's defeated the angel, she's destroyed the Eva, she's ejected, and in the flyover, there's the voiceover that says, "Oh, we hate that we have to use these kids to fight these angels." And then as Mari comes out onto the top of the deck, she also inverts that saying, and she says, "I feel bad using the adults to get closer to a real Eva." So Mari has her own agenda, and I think this is kind of really reflects the idea of impermanence and the ever-changing nature of reality. So I think this is like the first step of it, but let's kind of go into some other Heraclitus aphorisms. So we'll go into let's go into a list of some of these Heraclitus aphorisms. Obviously, we started out with the first one, that you cannot step into the same river twice, and this is maybe one of the most famous sayings attributed to Heraclitus, and it's kind of an enigmatic statement as well. It's like it has concepts of perpetual change. It has concepts of the transient nature of existence. It also has the idea of this flux and flow that we'll kind of see revisited a couple times, and also how that is something that we can weave in both to, let's say, Anno's process in Rebuild of Evangelion in Evangelion 2.0, but also in the usage of astrological, like Uranian kind of the domain of Uranian influence. We'll kind of talk about that. So the idea first off is this: the waters of the river are constantly in motion, right? So when you step into the river, the water touches your feet, and then that water quickly flows downstream, replaced by new water from upstream. So if you're going to step into the river again, even just a moment later, that water would be different because it's already flowed past you. So in this broader philosophical sense, the statement sort of suggests this idea that everything in the universe is in this state of constant flux, that nothing remains the same from one moment to the next, and that this kind of philosophy, it doesn't apply only to the physical world, but it also applies to our thoughts, our emotions, our perceptions, and maybe even to the process of art. Right, so let's, maybe this is where we can kind of go into it. We've talked a lot in the podcasts about world building, and obviously there's the concepts, let's say, of retconning, right? We know about retconning, whereas you go back and you change canon, right? So say you're writing a prequel, and you needed to find the origin of something. There's been lots of Batman reinterpretations of the Batman story, where they'll weave in, like, that the Joker was involved in Batman's origin, or that another character is, right? This kind of retconning that happens. But there's also this idea beyond retconning of adaptation in general, right? So the idea of, you make the film, like, you've got the book of Les Miserables, right? You've got the original book by Hugo, and then you're going to turn that book into a film, and then you're going to turn it into a musical, right? Each one of these adaptations takes it a different direction. And I think of a lot of animes have used this trope. I mean, I even think of like a trash anime like My Hime, right? My Hime will go, like, they did a season of it, and then the second season they kind of reboot the characters. And maybe even to a lesser degree, American Horror Story does it by having the same actors appear in different stories from season to season, right? This kind of idea of different ways to play with adaptation. But also the concept of the fact that, whenever we do a remake of a property, right, or even a cover of a song, right, you do a remake, like you think of the Evil Dead remake, or you think of a cover of a song like Stevie Ray Vaughan covering Hendrix's Voodoo Child. You can't copy it note for note, right? Otherwise it becomes just mimicry, right? So it's different from mimicry. The difference between mimicking and recreating or homage, it really ties into this idea of adaptation and also about retconning, right? So in the idea of this is like the Heraclitus idea is that maybe the idea of change is inherent in the nature of things, and that because we ourselves are changing and our perspective is changing, not only is the river different, but also we are different when we step into the river a second time. So here you see Anno stepping into the river of Evangelion a second time, and he has to bring it about a different way. And I think Mari here illustrates illustriously this concept, right? So Heraclitus' concept here is the idea of understanding the nature of existence in the dance of stability versus change, right? But let's kind of go into some other of Heraclitus's aphorisms. so we go through this. You cannot step into the same river twice. Generally saying that everything's in constant change, nothing remains the same from one moment to the next. But there's another aphorism called the road up and the road down are the same thing. How opposites are interconnected. What may seem contradictory may be part of the same process in reality. And this could be the, what is human instrumentality versus, human instrumentality versus the, second and third impacts. Another Heraclitus aphorism is character is destiny, right? And I think this kind of comes through, and when we see Shinji kind of represents this, Shinji's character. But even the character of Rei, and even the character of Asuka, right? These characters are quite, their life is bound to the character, right? And this is what character is destiny. Like the individual character determines their fate or their future. And you can see a lot of what the rebuild of Evangelion is. It's the rebuild of Shinji and Shinji's character. And we'll go into some examples of Shinji's character. Next, we have war is the father of all and the king of all, meaning that conflict and struggle are fundamental aspects of existence, and they can lead to transformation and growth. Everything flows, nothing stays. Fire lives the death of air, and air lives the death of fire, like the cyclical nature of existence. We said this one before, the way up and the way down are the same way. Dogs bark at what they don't understand. This maybe as a comment on ignorance or the tending to react negatively when you don't understand something. And I think, I'll kind of jump into this where Mari calls Shinji doggy, right? And Shinji's kind of a barker, right? He's someone who's always barking about his, sort of whining about stuff. And last one is the sun is every new day, right? So this is sort of like the kind of concept of renewal, right? So this is some Heraclitus high-level list of some of his aphorisms. But if you kind of go into how these fit with Evangelion 2.0, you cannot advance here. I think that the theme of flux really comes across all of these. So a 2.0, like let's say that everything about the change in plot and characters of 2.0 is definitely true to this idea of all is flux, let's say, right? So we get the new character Mari, we get changes in the storyline. For example, Asuka is now the one that Shinji attacks, right? And we'll kind of go into that scene. Just like you can't step into the same river twice, the viewers and even the anime makers cannot view Evangelion universe, the Evangelion universe of Neon Genesis Evangelion cannot be, you cannot redo is actually one of the other subtitles of the movies, right? So I think this is somewhat aware of on Anno's part, that we can't go back to the same universe exactly as we knew it. Right. But the other thing throughout the film, throughout 2.0, is the idea of the transformation of relationships. The dynamics subtly change between Shinji, Rei, and Asuka, and other characters are sort of shifting because even Shinji's point of view is somewhat different, right? They have a different evolved nature of human connection. And this sort of mirrors the Heraclitean view of constant transformation and motion. We can also see that the nature of third impact. And this is sort of like the way up is the way down. Third impact is central to the original series. The second impact is huge to the Evangelion, Neon Genesis Evangelion. But in the rebuild, third impact is a huge cataclysmic break that reshapes the world. And also Shinji's character comes out through this, right? This echoes Heraclitus' idea of that existence is in constant flux and that transformation, everything is subject to transformation at every moment. And finally, I think that there's a lot of emotional flux through this. We see Shinji's shift in mood, how Mari brings a new perspective, how Rei's effect on Shinji. Much of this is carried over from Neon Genesis Evangelion. But, see, Asuka is painted somewhat differently. And I think in many ways that Evangelion 2.0 is almost like an exploration of this Heraclitean idea of flux, right? So the film's emphasis on change, transformation. There's a There's a fragile balance of existence that sort of echoes what Heraclitus would talk about, the insights into the ever-changing nature of reality. And I think that the connections between this are definitely concepts that modern storytelling require and also demonstrate, and it sort of demonstrates the, let's say, the enduring relevance and universality of something like a pre-Socratic like Heraclitus. Another Heraclitus aphorism, he says, dogs bark at what they don't understand. And I kind of think of this as a little bit, just reminds me of how Mari calls Shinji doggy all the time. You know, we have that scene where she's parachuting onto the top of the nerve school kind of thing. She lands on the roof on top of Shinji. And then she's immediately like telling him that he smells like LCL and that he must be an Eva pilot. And you kind of get Shinji gets a new role. Like, you know, we've seen sort of his weird relationship with Rei, which is kind of introvert relationship. And then the Asuka, which is more like a sort of a tension. But here we have the kind of an affectionate role. Maybe only before that we haven't really seen it. And it's funny how she calls him doggy, right? And then Shinji is constantly in this role of being like the doggy, right? He's always barking and screaming about stuff and how he can't handle things, right? And I think that it's interesting how Mari kind of, as the one whose relating function is probably the most healthy of all the Eva pilots, because really none of them are great communicators of their emotions, right? I mean, Asuka yells, Shinji just whines, and Rei doesn't say anything. But Mari actually knows what she wants. She wants to pilot an Eva, but she recognizes in Shinji his doggy nature, right? And I think that's kind of a neat one. It's not much of a stretch, but it's just something to call out. And it's also one of these sort of favorite scenes of how Mari kind of gets introduced. And then as Evangelion Rebuild progresses, how her role really starts to fit in different areas where she replaces some action. The beast mode scene we'll talk about. And then even at the ending of 3.0 plus 1.0, how Shinji is with Mari at the end. So yeah, I wanted to call out that doggy thing. Thought it was kind of interesting. I kind of wanted to call out Shinji as a character, the character of a man, kind of from Heraclitus, when he sort of is willing to sort of risk third impact to save Rei, right? So he's reaching through here, through the field. He pierces through, keeps on pulling through. He sees her down below, right? And meanwhile, like the world is just being destroyed around them. He reaches out to her hand, and he's sort of willing to make that sacrifice, right? To make that human connection, right? So I just think that this sort of shows like the version of Shinji that is heroic. It sort of shows that also another element of change and flux. He's maturing here and saves her, even though it's kind of like third impact happens, right? So anyway, just wanted to call that one out. I think another concept here that's got that Heraclitus influence that can be applied to Mari in Rebuild is definitely around the idea of all this flux, right? So first off, we've got this introduction of change, right? So Mari's inclusion in the series, like we've been saying, is like a significant departure from the timeline, let's say, of Neon Genesis Evangelion, right? So the change of just adding her aligns with this concept that everything's in a state of flux. And I think even we see this similarly with the introduction of Sile, right? We had Nerve before, but now there's a whole new organization. Rebuild has kind of created a different version of the dynamic of the Evangelion world, right? But it's additive and it's also branching, right? The thing about Mari's character, she's very unpredictable, and she's not bound by the traditional roles or expectations. With our first three children, Shinji, Rei, and Asuka, we kind of get their three kind of personalities. But Mari does kind of bring in a kind of positive spin. She brings in and a chaotic nature, and she also brings in sort of a positive spin to things, where we don't see that with the other characters. I mean, Asuka is positive, but she's assertive, and I think Mari is more of a optimistic, and also enjoys it, right? You can tell that she really lives and breathes this Eva thing, and I think in a weird way, it's like the ultimate. It is the ultimate fan service, but it's interesting how there's a departure from the somber mood, and I think this goes to that all this flux concept of change is inevitable. And for Anno, I think he didn't want to retell the same story, right? So this is that huge, there's another kind of impact in addition to the third impact. There's just her impact on the other characters, right? So Mari's interacting with Shinji, and it creates a new dynamic that kind of ripples through everything. And again, this is the idea of this ripple effect affecting the path and the choices of characters. All is in flux. There's also this kind of metaphorical representation of flux, right? The idea of, she calls Shinji doggy, right? And like, Shinji's, sometimes he's brave and sometimes he's whining, but now we get this new identity for him, right? Now he's got the doggy identity, like her pet kind of thing, as opposed to idiot Shinji, that Asuka calls him idiot Shinji, right? So just as Heraclitus is saying that, we can't step into the river twice, Mari's interactions with Shinji show that even his own character and relationship, or the narratives that maybe Shinji's telling himself, is not static. And I think this is very psychological too, like the brooding nature of Neon Genesis Evangelion, which everyone loves, and especially the last episodes or even end of Evangelion. It's kind of flipped on its head a bit here to say you don't have to be what you don't want to be. There's probably parentheses in there somewhere, right? And then I think finally it's just like, let's call it Mari's approach to piloting even, kind of emphasizes the transient nature of things, like her attitude toward life. She's very bold, and she's kind of the embodiment of adaptability and ever-changing nature. I mean, think about how the beast mode gets activated. It's like we never knew. I mean, we've seen Evangelions go savage. I mean, even in the first episode of Neon Genesis Evangelion, Shinji gets into Unit 1, and that fight, although it's brief, in a flashback later we see that he actually did go into the beast mode with this. And I think that this is sort of like interesting to show how even what's known, like, did we even know that Eva Unit 2 had a beast mode, right? And it always makes me think that I want to take a Eva Unit 8 and make a beast mode version of it. I think that would be kind of a cool mod. Anyway, this is Mari's kind of presence in the story as all this flux. Last one I want to touch on is just the idea of the imagery of fire. So Heraclitus talks about symbolism of fire, and I kind of want to call that out with the third impact. Even just the rivers of blood, the use of the red color. So there's a symbolism of fire in 2.0, like fire is destruction, transformation, purification, and this is all kind of like the third impact. But it's also mixing the fire with a liquid, because the red blood sea, so it's kind of got a fire and blood. So like the third impact's visual representation is very fiery red colored sky, red colored ocean, apocalyptic transformation. And the fact that we're mixing fire's color with water's liquid kind of relates back to Heraclitus's rubric around fire lives the death of air, air lives the death of fire, water lives the death of earth, earth lives the death of water. There's kind of like a link to Shinji's actions, right? So Rei kind of triggering the near third impact, the destruction that comes out, and then Shinji's character to come back and save her. And I think this also kind of goes into the fact that Shinji does go back to rescue Rei, sort of links to the character is destiny that we see in Heraclitus's character is destiny quote, right? So got a bit of that there. There's also a strange connection to human instrumentality. It's always a kind of a mystery. And I think that fire symbolism here is the third impact is going to transform human existence, just like fire would transform things. Okay, so now I want to kind of bring it back to this astrological Uranus concept, right? So Heraclitus' philosophy has flux and change. It talks about I can't step into the same river twice. Fire is this primal substance. But then astrologically, planet Uranus is associated with sudden change, innovation, revolutions, rebellions, upheavals, right? So it sort of represents the breaking of tradition and ushering in a new way of thinking. And I think we really see this also here in Rebuild, right? There's also the unexpected events that come out of the Uranian influence in a person's astrological chart, right? It's being unpredictable, surprising, and shifts in direction. You can see Mari sort of symbolizes this as well. So I think between Heraclitus and this Uranian energy, we see there's a common thread of transformation, change. There's a symbolism here around the ever-changing universe and sudden shifts and revolutions. There's also this idea of disruption of the status quo, which I think Anno was very keen on ever since his end of Evangelion. We see Heraclitus focus on this transient nature of things and this Uranian disruption of the established order of the fandom, let's say, is also in effect. As for the great cycle of Uranus, just talking about this in terms of flux, Uranus has an 84-year cycle. As stated, 12 revolutions of Uranus around the orbit last a little over 1,000 years, so it's a millennium. So in fact, one solar year of Uranus is 1,000 Earth years, kind of, right? So this millennial period of the great year of Uranus, the most important turning point in such a great year are quite evidently its beginning, midpoint, and ending, corresponding to the equinoctial points of our solar year, right? So the idea here is there's a opposition and then there's an equinox, right? In the cycle, midpoints, just like in the Earth's year, right? So, but the problem is the great year of Uranus is 1,000 years. So Dane Rudyard says, but one could also perhaps even more significantly compare this great cycle of the 1,000 years to the transits of Uranus through the 12 houses. Musicologists with a philosophical occult bent of mind could establish an analogy with the series of 12 intervals of fifths. So I shall simply refer to the 12 phases of the great cycle. So he starts out in 1927, going pastward, he reaches back to 922, which is the church. This is similar to the way we did in our Neptune Great Year podcast. If you want to go, we have a couple Neptune ones. I will probably do some more Uranus ones, so I'll probably save that going through the Great Year of Uranus. I'll probably do that as a next podcast. But I just wanted to call it out here to talk about how we'll go into in the next coming podcasts some of that what resonates here with Heraclitus in Evangelion, but we'll sort of apply it more generally. So I just wanted to call this out, and then we can get back to Heraclitus. We've talked a little bit about the element of fire too. So the idea of this emphasis of fire as consuming and changing the state is also a metaphorical alignment with the Uranian energy of transformative influence. And I think finally there's just this kind of sense of an overall unpredictability in Heraclitus' view of flux, right? If everything's in flux, this Uranian sort of force in nature sort of comes with the unexpected event, and how it underscores the universe is inherently unpredictable and dynamic, right? So interestingly, if we pull all these together with Evangelion 2.0, we kind of can see some kind of synergy, I guess, form. Yeah, finally, I think connecting the three of these together, Evangelion 2.0, Heraclitus, and then Uranian energy, we got the theme of change, right? Everything is flux. Uranus symbolizes the sudden and transformative change. And then the rebuild also is an exercise in transformation and change, right? Both in the characters and in the world. There's also this sort of focus on disruption and innovation. Heraclitus talks about the transient nature of existence. The Uranian astrological energy talks about breaking tradition. And we also have Evangelion in the sense of challenging the mecha and anime tropes, right? And introducing the unexpected twists, like they're not even mechas, right? They're actually humans, right? Or angels, whatever you want to call them. There's this idea of the fire and transformation through Heraclitus. Uranian energy rules over transformation. And I think even with third impact in Evangelion 2.0, you see this symbolic destruction and renewal that comes out of this. So it's sort of like a Shiva event, right? And again, this is very unpredictable. As fans of Neon Genesis, we're expecting the river to be the same. And what the Uranian energy shows us is we should expect the unexpected, and that surprises are normal, and that the plot twists and character insights that come in from an addition of someone like Amari is definitely part of this unpredictability and unfamiliarity. So we can sort of see by aligning these elements together, you can kind of see that the themes resonate across not only this ancient philosophy and this astrological thinking, but just the way of storytelling, right? So I thought it was kind of an interesting concept to share. I think the last part of this I kind of want to focus on a bit is just the idea of I've got this great edition here of the 2.0 storyboards, and I kind of wanted to talk about the manga process as flux as well. So I guess my idea here is just the idea of the process of creating the anime, and how this storyboarding is also how the mind is in flux, and how the process from flux to form sort of is happening. So maybe we'll just wrap up in this last idea. Guys, if you haven't already, go check out our links below for the bookstore. Can check out our Patreon as well, as if you like. And we also have a series coming out where we've taken some of these podcasts and turned them into books. You can check the bookstore links below. That would help out the channel. Thanks a lot for your support. So I thought we'd wrap up talking about this anime process. I mean, we got this great storyboard version. I almost kind of like this version of looking at the print form. I always love notebooks. We've talked about Jung's Black Books here, which are notebooks. We've talked about even Philip K. Dick's exegesis, which are his notes. I think it's interesting to look at these storyboards in light of this Heraclitean philosophy, the idea of flux and change, but also in the light of the Uranian transformation. So let's kind of go through one more time, but this time really focusing on what is that creative process. What is the idea of the mental conception, those little marks on a page that formulate, if you start looking through this book, these are the marks that ended up becoming this beloved anime, right? So start out first with, I think, the mind's river. Let's call it the mind's river, right? So we have idea formation first. So as we discussed with Heraclitus, everything in flux can be a metaphor of the ever-changing flow of ideas. We can call it the creativity in the creator's mind is like this river, right? And just like the river is never the same from moment to moment, neither are thoughts or inspirations that form the basis of say, the story you want to tell. So I think that somewhere in the anime creator's mind, this constant change, the fluidity of creativity, where the ideas are kind of evolving and combining and transforming. It's just flowing by, and you sit by that flow. And then storyboarding kind of comes in, right, as a second part. This is channeling the flow. The first step of transformation, Uranian transformation, is where you take the idea and you bring the flow into just some sketches. It's not the final product, but it's a transition from ideas to storyboard. So this is kind of like the river's flow in a more defined course. The creator takes the fluid, abstract concepts from the mind and translates them through the pencil to these marks. And if you look at some of these drawings, some of them are quite detailed, and that might be more vivid in the creator's mind. Others are just indications of how the motion might look, or the blocking of the scene. sometimes there's just some stick figures here, and then sometimes there's beautiful kind of manga level and drawings here that really set the stage for, they'll call it keyframes. So the stage here is still flexible, right? We haven't locked in anything yet. And the storyboards can be revised. You can see on the side, there's tons of notes and adjustments and direction points on how the anime will mature these images, right? But this also reflects that Heraclitus' idea that everything is subject to change, but also the idea of the Uranian transformation, where we've gone from a mental picture to now the first sketches, right? And then we're channeling the flow with the storyboarding. And now from there we go into the actual creation of the animation, right? So now this is all of that work that goes in to turn storyboards into a definite form. And this is from flux to form, right? We'll call this stage from flux to form. So at the animation stage, the storyboards, in addition to the narrative, the storytelling, the vision, art direction, all of these components come together with the team. And this is this kind of Heraclitean concept of flux meeting the realization of form. So the ever-changing river of ideas is finding expression in the tangible images and scenes. And even in this stage, though, change and revision are going to happen, right? So even as the work is in process, you'll see some minor changes. As I look through this, sometimes I struggle to see what they actually were drawing it from this and how it got to the anime, or things that are slightly different. And actually in the back of this book, you can see that there's some corrections or inserted scenes. This is kind of echoing, again, the idea of the constant transformation. And then finally, there's a sort of the final product comes out. There's like the river's journey. The finished anime is released, right? It's a snapshot of the creative river at a specific moment. It's sort of like locking in a temporary resting place beside this river of the story that the storyboard started, but it actually started in the, mangaka's head kind of thing. Now there's this potential for sequels, adaptations, reinterpretations of fan theories, commentaries. All of these other things can be born out of this work. So again, we cannot step into the same river twice applies also to the viewer's experience of the anime, right? So different viewers, and even the same viewer at different times in their life, are going to perceive different things and interpret the anime in unique ways. So you're reflecting on the change and perspective of the contents. And this is very much the insight of that. This is why the Uranian astrological symbolism also includes things like scientific reason and dreams are also kind of partly in this. Invention, revolution, all of these things. They say Uranus is the sun behind the sun, right? So we can kind of wrap up with that idea of the continued creativity that flows out of this transformation as an eternal flow, right? The creative process never ends, right? So that the thought became the storyboard becomes the anime becomes the viewer experience becomes the canon, divergent theories, and these new ideas are born from a complicated work like this, and the cycle continues, right, reflecting this eternal flow of the philosophical river, right? So there's an ongoing nature of creativity, reinvention, interplay between fluid ideas and solid expression, and it all kind of resonates out of this Heraclitean view of the universe as a place of change and transformation. So hopefully that was interesting. I think I kind of want to sum up the process of creating this is sort of a dynamic journey, and how it really aligns with Heraclitus' philosophy, and also how that Uranian energy kind of takes the form of a nuanced interpretation. Well, hopefully that was interesting for everyone. Just kind of talking about these first steps into creative realization, capturing the moment in flux, constant transformation, so even to the point of individual interpretation, kind of linking Evangelion 2.0 with the Heraclitus' stepping into the river, and also this concept of the transformative nature of astrological Uranian symbol. So yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed that. Let me know down in the comments if you have any ideas. And go check out our links below. Thank you guys, as always, for liking and subscribing, and we will talk to you in the next podcast. We've got some new news coming out if you want to go check out on our Patreon. Upcoming project that I want to sort of announce here. You can go check out the Cat 2 Journals hardcover edition, and all of that helps us out. So thank you for listening, and we will talk to you in the next podcast. Take care. Bye-bye.